On March 27, 2017, Bruno de Melo Silva Borges, an educated young Brazilian man in his mid-20s, suddenly dropped off the face of the earth. His family members desperately searched for a clue as to where he was. Upon entering his now vacant bedroom, what met them was something unrecognizable. Their son's room was plastered with occult inscriptions, a painting of him with an alien, and standing in the middle of the room was a 6'6" tall stone statue. But let's back up a bit. In the United States alone, around 600,000 people go missing every year, accounting for 0.1% of the total population. If we assume the same rate applies to every country, then worldwide, a whopping 14 million people vanish yearly. Every one of these unfortunate souls has a story, and we will never, ever get to hear most of them. But there are a few cases where the mystery of someone's disappearance attracts the media's attention. Back in the day, they just put your face on the back of a milk carton. Nowadays, these cases are published online, where they can be seen by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of onlookers, each with their own 2 cents to offer. However, to attract that level of attention, a case must be strange enough to pique people's interest, featuring such a strange situation that the public cannot help but follow along, wanting answers to sate their morbid curiosity. Only a very select few, with sufficiently cryptic particularities and an alluring conspiratorial mystique, are met with this kind of treatment. The case of Bruno Borges is certainly one of them. Information about Bruno's past seems to be scant at best. His Facebook account, presumably where most of his online activities took place, was deleted. But from what does exist on the internet, all of it indicates that Bruno Borges was a relatively typical young adult. What stood out was his particular interest in dense and demanding reading material. According to him, it was his way of making up for not having studied hard enough in school before entering college. Though he began taking business, law, and psychology courses during his brief time in school, he failed to ever graduate from any of them. That is, until 2014, when he took an interest in philosophy. His mother was supportive of his endeavors overall. Still, she couldn't help being concerned about how devoted he was to his obsession with unusual literature. She struggled to keep up with supervising what kind of books he chose to read. In her own words, she stated, "He began to read a lot, and, in my opinion, was reading too much. He started to buy many books, and I was worried, but always careful about what kind of things he would read. The kind of people he could talk to were intellectuals. He's enlightened. In school, he was always different, with a great capability for persuasion. He had such a good heart that he would give things from his house to other people, such as his shirts and pants. I'm not saying it because he's my son. He was very loving. He could see people's souls." According to her, his friend circle had always been populated with the homeless, mentally ill, or otherwise socially excluded people. Up until that point, though, his idiosyncrasies had never been a hindrance. His father, who was very well known locally, owned a family restaurant called Pau de Quejo and a nightclub and performance venue called Mason Borges. Both establishments were located in the city of Rio Branco, the latter of which had been operating for 30 years and is still active, hosting events ranging from pop concerts to Freemason and Rotary Club meetups. He would often post pictures of his family, including Bruno, which signaled that perhaps he wasn't really a black sheep. Other than his indirect presence in his family members' social media accounts, there's only one remnant of his online activity that still exists: a comment on a true crime website article about Anatoly Moskvin, a Russian linguist who was arrested for mummifying the bodies of 26 girls, ages 3 to 29, and keeping them in his apartment. His comment reads, "So he's accused of being insane for exhuming corpses, in which the spirit has long left the vain matter which encloses the body. He is an extremely intelligent individual, and his behaviors are innovative and eccentric precisely because he's not a sheep. That's why everyone thinks it's absurd that he wants to do what the Egyptian civilization already did during the apex of its cultural development, and they're considered one of the greatest civilizations ever." I feel like I'll be the only one that understands that this guy is being accused of being a criminal, but no one knows what his true reasoning for what he did was. Burn him, like they did Giordano Bruno. The clear, "I'm 13 and this is deep" vibe radiating from his post raises a question. How much of what his mom said about him was true? And how much of it was just an old woman who thinks you're a genius when you know how to empty the recycle bin on her computer? Back in 2013, before he became interested in philosophy, he had told his mother, Denise, of a project he was working on for which he would need money. She said she would support him financially if she knew what it was about, but Bruno refused to reveal any details. He would look for other people who would trust him enough to invest in his ideas without knowing what they actually were. He tried other ways to raise money through the internet, such as selling his 80-inch flat-screen TV for half its original price on the Brazilian equivalent of eBay. However, there is no way to verify whether it sold or not. Eventually, he successfully secured 20,000 Brazilian reais, equivalent to roughly $5,000 USD, from his cousin Eduardo. He talked to him extensively and somehow got him on board with the mysterious undertaking. Bruno did reveal a small portion of what the project consisted of to him, which his cousin later spoke about in an interview. In our first conversation, I read about 15 pages of the book Bruno wrote, and since I liked it, I told him I'd help finance it. While talking to him, I noticed his ideas made sense, though he didn't tell me what the entire project actually was. He just told me it was something never before seen in the world, that no one had ever done it, and that it would become widespread very fast. I believed him and invested. This was roughly around 2016, and once he got the money he was after, he also told his mom about the book. Rather, the books. There were 14 in total that he intended to write, claiming that they would change humanity for the better. He asked for an entire year without having to work or go to college to finish it. After asking the opinion of a doctor, presumably a psychologist, he was allowed to. Bruno was a 23-year-old bookworm with no record of bad behavior who wanted to spend a year doing a literary project instead of attending college. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, they were all about to find out. On March 1st, 2017, his parents would go on a trip that would last 24 hours, during which Bruno locked himself in his room, leaving only to eat. While his parents were away, Bruno was only accompanied by his sister, Gabriella, and his twin brother, Rodrigo. He told them that he had already finished 5 books and wanted to publish one of them. He asked his sister to read it, and after reading it twice and failing to understand any of it, she would read it once more and be blown away by its contents. On the 24th of March, he talked to his neighbor, Maria, in her driveway. He told her about the books and his plans, saying that once the books got published, he would help her and others. 3 days later, on the 27th, Bruno's parents would return from their trip, and as usual, they would go out to have lunch with the rest of the family. Later that day, Bruno's father, Athos, would drive him home, not knowing that it would be the last time he would ever see his son again. After roughly 2 p.m. on a Monday, no other family member of Bruno's would hear from him. They attempted to call his phone, but it had been switched off. Bruno had never done something like this before, so the situation was all too worrisome for his family. He hadn't even taken anything with him, not any money or identifying documentation. All he had were his clothes and a backpack with his computer's hard drive. The police deputy put in charge of Bruno's investigation had declared that he would keep all information about the case private. Despite this, a video leaked of Bruno's family members going through his bedroom, which was now devoid of all furniture it formerly had, and converted into an occult study room. The room had been decked out wall to wall and all over the floor, with symmetric blocks of encrypted handwritten text surrounded by mystical and alchemical symbols. Around the room were a set of 14 notebooks, each marked with red Roman numerals. A few images were hanging on the walls, one of a robed man with runic spirals on his back, holding an Egyptian ankh in one hand, and the other a Masonic square and compass, in front of a Rosicrucian cross. There was also the logo of Cicada 3301, and an airbrushed image of a robed Bruno with translucent eyes in an otherworldly, galactic landscape, with an also robed gray alien behind him with his hand on Bruno's shoulder. Stashed in the corner of the room were many altars of pagan deities. That leaves the most mysterious and unexplainable part of it all. In the center of his room, there was what seemed to be a magic circle, a common element of esoteric and ritualistic occult practices, and atop the circle, a life-size sculpted stone statue of Giordano Bruno, an Italian philosopher and mathematician from the Renaissance who, despite initially being a Dominican friar, became a Hermetic occultist and was found guilty of heresy by the Roman Inquisition, for which he was burned at the stake by secular authorities. In the video, the woman speaking speculates that the statue's cost was how the $5,000 was spent. All of this significantly added to Bruno's already highly confusing and worrisome predicament. He had now been missing for multiple days. his family was mainly concerned for his mental health, considering that he had possibly suffered a psychotic break that led him to decorate his room in such a way. It is, after all, a stereotype that the mentally ill will write all over their walls. However, people online seem to gravitate more towards the less realistic and more mystical possibilities. They thought aliens had contacted him and formally summoned him to become part of some celestial council due to the great wisdom he had accumulated during his time on Earth. His vanishing was, in fact, an abduction. Well, more of a voluntarily intergalactic migration on Bruno's part. A more popular piece of speculation was that Bruno's fixation with Giordano wasn't actually because he appreciated his contributions to scientific and religious matters. In actuality, it was because he believed himself to be the reincarnation of Giordano, with some people even remarking upon their physical similarity. The sculptor of the statue even echoed this idea. When located, he explicitly said that he believed Bruno to be Giordano reincarnate, attempting to finish his life's work, interrupted by his untimely death sentence. The 83-year-old sculptor, Jorge, also clarified that the actual cost of the statue was about $1,300, meaning it remained a mystery as to where the rest of the money went. Of Bruno, he said, "Most people don't understand, but I've known him for a long time. I believe he is Giordano Bruno reincarnated. I can't say more than that. The only thing I can say is he's finished the books that Giordano left unfinished. I want to tell his mother and father not to worry, that he is fine and will return to present this beautiful, fantastic project to the world." Despite this somewhat cryptic message, Jorge declined to know Bruno's actual whereabouts. He did show the police officers the last messages he exchanged with Bruno through text. In these interactions, Bruno complimented his work on the statue while referring to Jorge as Master Rivas. He was satisfied with the state of the project, and soon, the world would come to know his work. Shortly after, Bruno's father posted an 8-minute video of himself commenting on the situation and the internet's reaction. He asked people not to judge, speculate, or make any claims based on their misconceived notions of who Bruno was or why he did what he did. He asserted that his son was exceedingly charitable and would never have done this for attention. All the while, he apologized for not having believed in his son's project. This didn't help because, for most of the video, he didn't exhibit the kind of behavior you would expect from a father whose son went missing just 3 days prior. He spent most of the video describing and promoting Bruno's project, despite supposedly not knowing what it was about, but promised to translate the cryptographed manuscripts and publish them as books. Needless to say, it was weird for a concerned father to be that calm during his son's disappearance. Additionally, he was visibly reading from a script, saying he was confident his son would return to put his signature on the project eventually. Quickly, people took to thinking that this was, indeed, a classic example of a publicity stunt and that his family was in on it. Stranger still, news outlets covering Bruno's case revealed a crucial detail. The last time he was seen wasn't by his father, as we were led to think initially, but by security cameras near his house a full day after his disappearance. All of this mounted into a bizarre set of evidence that cast doubt on the whole story. As the pieces that didn't fit together kept piling up, it didn't hinder the more superstitious portions of Bruno's online following for 1 second. They continued to claim that this all had to do with UFOs, reincarnation, and other equally outlandish things. The family didn't seem to mind this, once again calling their honesty about the situation into question. On the 23rd of June, 3 months after his son's disappearance, his father posted what looked like a 3D render of his son's now translated book. It was titled Theory of the Absorption of Knowledge, sitting next to a lamp in a somber, outdoor environment. The book would only be released an entire month later, on the 21st of July. How and why was this happening? Well, the police, who were unfazed by the air of mystique that had accumulated around the disappearance of Bruno, continued to investigate. They eventually discovered that on the day of his disappearance, Bruno made another listing on an online sales website. This time, he promised the Philosopher's Stone, the central objective of most esoteric traditions that can purportedly make you immortal, transcend reality, or a combination of the two. He put it for sale for a measly $5, which is mighty charitable of him. It had a 100% 5-star positive rating by 7 votes, though only 1 buyer had given it a like. It had a 1-day delivery, and had already been ordered 12 times. We should be looking out for the 12 Brazilians who bought this and became immortal. The description, which was typed out in English, read as follows: "I have discovered the greatest mystery of the world, how to make the Philosopher's Stone, also known as the the elixir of life. This will change humanity as we know it. You can benefit from my magnum opus at the click of a button. You will get a neatly formatted PDF ebook with all the details on how to do this yourself. As soon as you order, you will get this immediately. The world needs this information. Tell everyone about it. Who would have thought that the greatest mystery of our time would be revealed in an ebook PDF? Also, on the same day that Bruno went missing, he went to a notary's office to formally register what was dubbed Project Enzo. This was the publishing contract for his books, wherein it was revealed that he had established a business partnership with his friend Marcelo de Souza Ferreira in order to get 15% of the book's profits. Another notable clause in the contract was a 3-year-long period where an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, would be in effect, meaning Marcelo could not reveal any details of the project to anyone without Bruno's permission. For some reason, when this was looked into, another company registered in Bruno's name turned up online, but this one claimed Bruno was a supplier of prepared food items for companies, whatever that means. When this was discovered, the police asked Bruno's mother if she knew any of this, to which she replied, "That is one line of investigation of the police. It doesn't mean it's true. I've always known of the project. Marcelo was Bruno's helper, as in he was hired to help him. He worked for Bruno, and Bruno paid him a salary. Of the 4 books that I've read, I guarantee this isn't some kind of scam." Gabriella, Bruno's sister, would also speak on the matter. "Ever since his disappearance, we've known of the contract, and this never meant much to us, especially because, for Bruno's plans to work, he needs money. After all, you can't build hospitals and help those in need just with the love in your heart, so don't even start. What's the problem with him making a contract to help friends that helped him? The problem is people always find a way to denigrate the image of a good person that only has plans to help their neighbor. It's a lack of love, of empathy. It's measuring someone else according to your own ruler. Everyone who knows Bruno knows exactly what is in his heart and what his real intention with the publishing of his work is, which, by the way, is very interesting. Soon, we'll publish the first book. These were entirely fair suspicions on the part of the police, who were legitimately trying to figure out where Bruno was so that they could move on and dedicate their resources elsewhere. Why were they consistently being met with this vague, antagonistic demeanor from the Borges family, who, all the while, kept blatantly promoting the book instead of being transparent with the police, who, at that point, were not only looking outside of the state for Bruno, but had even contacted Interpol over Bruno potentially having left the country? It was later discovered that Bruno's encryptions were actually extremely basic letter replacements through the Masonic cipher from Disney's Junior Woodchuck's guidebook. To make matters worse, the texts, despite being full of $10 words and technical terms, were rife with bad grammar, according to the dedicated Portuguese-speaking people who were skeptical enough of the story to try and decode the images of text that were made available. In addition to discovering that Bruno was picked up by security cameras, there were a number of people who had witnessed Bruno after he left his home. To begin with, a cab driver named Antonio, who picked him up about a mile away from his house, said that Bruno spent all of the 15-minute long drive on a phone call, seemingly receiving instructions or directions from whoever was calling him. The taxi driver let Bruno off at a tailor, where he, along with his friend Marcio Gaiote, would commission 3 tunics like the one depicted in the painting in his room. When asked by the tailor if the robes were for a church, he said, "Almost. These robes have never been found." This same friend, Marcio, would later speak to journalists, saying that Bruno was planning to go live in isolation in a cave, and that he had fasted for 12 days while he worked on the books, which, considering the direction this story has taken so far, is probably not true. A childhood friend of Bruno's, Thales Vasconcelos, claimed to have helped Bruno encrypt the books, also mentioning that Bruno spoke of astral projection, which is believed to occur when you meditate so hard your soul leaves your body. Another person, this time a family friend and doctor, said that Bruno's project was being helped along by the spirits. He tacitly admitted that this was a euphemistic way of saying Bruno heard voices. Another childhood friend of Bruno's said that he had experimented with hallucinogenic teas, and that his isolation might have been to go visit a native tribe to engage in ayahuasca rituals. After leaving the tailor, Bruno was seen going to a motel, though the people working at said motel claimed he never entered the establishment, believing instead that he went into to the forest behind it. There, he was supposedly performing secret rituals, though no one seems to have an idea of what the performance of those rituals consisted of, but presumably he must have also been accompanied by Marcio and Marcelo. It was only on the 31st of May that, after discovering the publishing contracts, the police arrested Marcelo, or, more specifically, he was taken to the police station for having falsely claimed that he hadn't known of Bruno's whereabouts after he disappeared. In Marcelo's phones, they found text messages to Marcio claiming that they would become rich from the marketing strategy they had planned from the rollout of Bruno's books. While investigating this connection, they also discovered that Bruno's furniture had been moved to Marcio's house, and not only that, but that Bruno's mom knew of it too since the start, also concealing this information from the police. In an interview, Marcio would speak about some of what Bruno had told him before disappearing. Bruno was very simple, humble, which caught my attention. I even taunted him, asking him how he planned to live in a cave if he didn't know how to fry an egg. I told him that he would have to hunt, make fire, that kind of thing, and that it was better for him to just get an apartment and go read his books. He only drank water, saying that it was better for him to work in that state. I was even worried about him, telling him that he should eat. Bruno got very thin in the last few days to finish the project, but he didn't give me any other information so that I could tell you what the project was about. I asked him why he wanted to put a statue in his room, and he just said it was a part of the project. When I did, he had begun to write something on the floor, but the walls were still intact. A friend from Bruno's college named Jamie also reiterated that Bruno was considering some kind of publicity stunt in order to get rich off of his works. Despite this blatant obstruction of justice, Marcelo was never charged with anything, and the police simply abandoned the case of Bruno, as clearly this was a marketing campaign and nothing more. When it was published on the 20th of July, the book did indeed get massive amounts of attention, garnering over 15,000 readers on the first day of its ebook release, though the negative criticism it received was quite scathing. The bad reviews it got are deserved, even without the publicity stunt, because, from what's available online of it, it seemed that Bruno's book was a vaguely connected compendium of people he considered sages, including Hitler, Gandhi, Michael Jackson, Jesus Christ, and of course, himself. Other than the glaring grammatical errors made throughout the entire book, which were ironic considering how much emphasis Bruno put on being an intellectual, he also spent large portions of the book simply retelling grade school tier historical facts about philosophers that were seemingly copied straight from Google. Bruno also claimed that when he was 20 years old, he spent a week sleeping only 30 minutes a day, and some days he didn't sleep or eat at all. Though this, he says, was exceptional, as usually he sleeps a regular 2 to 4 hours a day. His instructions to become a sage like him were to stop having sex, isolate yourself from the world, become vegan, and become ambidextrous. The reasons he gives for this are that some famous scientists also had at least one of these characteristics, and Bruno himself, as the quintessential sage, has all of them. According to him, he's actually gone beyond vegan, eating only raw, uncooked vegetables. I don't think this guy had to try very hard to not have sex because, I doubt anything even works down there from this kind of diet. As you can see here, if you have sex and you eat meat, you can only spend 33% of your time acquiring knowledge. But if you're an asexual vegan, you can spend a whopping 85% of your energy absorbing wisdom. Sounds about right. Wonder what happens when you switch to an all-soy diet. Like seemingly every schizophrenic person, he's big into diagrams. As you can see here, his demonstration of his discovery of new knowledge is what appears to be the kind of equations you would probably learn in elementary school. For some reason, there are not one, but two thought bubbles with the all caps words, "A new knowledge was generated, giving continuity." To give you an example of how redundant and unreadable his book is, here's a small translated excerpt of Bruno's magnum opus, which he spent $5,000 and 4 years developing. We see that the easy path is a line with no curves, straight and uniform. Notwithstanding, the hard path is well described as having innumerable curvatures, and precisely for it not being uniform, you cannot see its end. Differently from the illusion caused by those who follow the easy path and think that they can see the end of the line, this new way will be full of barriers, and few are those who dedicate themselves to them. To have an appropriate notion of how treacherous it is to permeate this course, as well as glorious and virtuous, it is enough that we base ourselves on the lives of great men who came to Earth. Altogether, it is necessary to first learn of the ways to follow this direction, and they shall be divided in two as well. Did you catch any of that? Yeah, me neither. It seems that his masterpiece consisted mostly of expounding on obvious things, or alluding to some kind of secret or harder to access knowledge that he never made an effort to actually convey to the reader. All he did was give the impression that he had some great and hidden information without actually disclosing it. In the wake of Bruno's disappearance and the release of his books, many groups popped up attempting to decode his mysterious words and his supposed alchemical knowledge, garnering up to tens of thousands of people in websites and Facebook groups dedicated to it. Though after realizing how insignificant and vague Bruno's knowledge was, they quickly disbanded. However, the story doesn't end there. 4 months and 14 days after the beginning of this ridiculous odyssey, Bruno returned. On Friday the 11th of August 2017, at 5:22 in the morning, Bruno would reappear on his family's doorstep, severely underweight, dehydrated, and with no shoes on. Because of his untimely return, and the fact that no one was expecting it, he had to wait over an hour before a neighbor called his father and told him to go check who was at the door. In an interview, his father said, "When I saw him, we hugged very tightly and my legs got weak. He held me so I wouldn't fall. As a gift for Father's Day, for me, there was no better thing." As for Bruno, he would retain a cryptic air about his absence, only giving a few hints as to the nature of his disappearance, saying, "What I can say is that I was isolated. I had no access to anything, or else it would destroy my objective. I sought isolation precisely so that I wasn't interrupted by the collective. What matters is the objective. I was in nature. I did a study about the place I was going, and what I would need to do to maintain myself there." When informed of how much stress he put his family through, he would add, "I don't regret isolating myself, but not having told them about what I was going to do is one of the things I regretted most in my life. It was a big mistake I made to not have told them. They have a great concern for me, and I thought that with what I left behind, everybody would understand that I had left to seek out the truth of life the moment they saw the way I left my bedroom." The police, however, saw this as an opportunity to finally close in on Bruno with their theory, which at this point was a virtual certainty, that his vanishing was nothing but a marketing ploy to get his book some traction. On August 15th, Bruno gave a statement to the cops admitting that he disappeared of his own volition, and that he wasn't coerced by any external force. A little over a month later, as things cooled down, Bruno would once again comment on his own situation, revealing that since his return, he had gained almost 30 pounds of the weight he had lost while gone, and that his condition was so bad that he needed IV fluids for a while. On the reactions his vanishing and his book had, he would say, "Since I didn't have contact with anything and always had a lot of faith in this project, I was hoping that the reaction was different. Besides the fact that, in my own studies, I conclude that whoever innovates tends to be antagonized or met with hostility. But I wasn't prepared and was a bit surprised with the reactions, since my intentions were good." A couple of days later, he would open up his bedroom for guided visitations, since he considered it to be a greatly misunderstood work of art, complaining that people didn't realize how inspiring and potentially touristic it was. He followed this up with claims that he read the New Testament at least 16 times during his absence, and that he had material for 20 more books. That's right, just one book wasn't enough. He wanted to do 20. He also said that his original plan was to be isolated for 3 to 5 years, but that his experiences in the first 2 months had already done whatever trick he expected them to. He seemed to genuinely believe that, by the time he returned, the book's publishing would have changed the world, and everyone would be slobbering all over it. As for the criticisms of his book, he would judge them to be simply because of how resentful and defensive society gets when someone breaks a paradigm. He says he denied fame and fortune, as when he returned, he received over 100 requests to appear in TV shows and YouTube channels, or even to do advertisements, all of which he refused. However, the friends with whom he did this project would also come to question the truth of what he was saying, since as it turns out, Bruno ended up not paying them the percentages he was contractually obliged to, resulting in a lawsuit, in which Marcio legally requested that the publishers retained the profits until the matter was cleared. According to Marcio himself, he was owed 4% of the book's proceeds every 10th day of the month, and he got precisely 0 of it. It would then become public that, just in the brief time since the book had been released, it had already sold over 20,000 copies, each for 24.90 Brazilian reais, which equates to a lump sum of about 500,000 Brazilian reais, or almost $100,000 US. Borges hadn't even informed Marcio how many books were sold, going as far as acting as if there was no money to speak of. Ultimately, this led to Bruno saying he would never charge any money ever again for people to read his writings. exclusively publishing them for free on the internet in the form of PDFs. Though this might indicate some degree of sincerity on the part of Bruno, him and his lawyers were still dragging their feet to not show how much of the profits he was taking in. Additionally, the claims about values they had made to Marcio were being contradicted by the claims of the publishers, so certainly at least some lying was occurring. Though the end result of the lawsuit seems to have not been publicly reported on, presumably this must have been settled since we haven't seen any more news about it since the last disclosure. As far as the fallout of Project Enzo goes, this is it. But what of Bruno Borges himself? What has he gotten into since? Other than going back to college for psychology, though he should be the one going to a psychologist, he put up an Instagram account which is still active to this day, in the bio of which he entitles himself the author of the Decoded Voynich Manuscript. If you're unaware, the Voynich manuscript is an entirely different can of worms. It's a medieval document written in an incomprehensible language, with illustrations of plants that don't exist, which remains a mystery to this day. It seems right up his alley, though. We also have a link to nothing less than an NFT collection on OpenSea, where he apparently is selling a total of 231 NFTs of his translations of the Voynich manuscript, which are, obviously, just him randomly replacing the text in the original document with his own musings. It truly seems to be the scam that never ends. In his website, brunoescritor.com, there is an archive of the pictures and books from Project Enzo. As it turns out, he stuck to his word as far as making the rest of the manuscripts available for free online. And here, we find that Enzo is essentially the protagonist in a series of fanfic-tier novels as a self-insert for Bruno, where he could play out his fantasies of being a philosopher in Greek antiquity, whose daring and innovative truths threatened the establishment. It's worth noting that most of these books are extremely short and make little to no sense at all, which is to be expected at this point. The self-entitled Alchemist of Acre, Bruno Borges, varies in his topic choice, from non-fiction texts like the TAC, to treatises on psychology, to insane fantasies of Enzo waking up on another planet. But that's not all. There is another project listed on his website, one called Project A2, laid out in a similar fashion to Enzo. In its synopsis, Bruno claims he's invested 50,000 Brazilian reais into it, and once again, expects it to change the world. The first thing here is a translated Voynich manuscript we've already gone over. Funnily enough, the second book is called The Universe of a Schizophrenic, with this monstrosity for its cover art. And this time, with the author's name listed as Aloha Alai, which I haven't had the slightest idea what it's supposed to mean, actually, but yeah, it's there. The third book follows the same pattern, but the fourth is a little different. This one's explanation is that it's meant to invoke in the reader archetypical senses of the collective unconscious and how they relate to the concept of Lucifer, to free people from the chains of organized religion. That's right, church is a scam, become an edgy Satanist instead. How anyone doesn't see this guy as a glorified 13-year-old Redditor just continues to befuddle me. There's also another page with a video attachment to it. It seems to be copying that old creepy video where a guy in a plague mask has a blinking light in his hand that's full of codes, but with a tenth of the aesthetic sensibility and production value. The page of images for Project A2 is just as hideous and confusing, and this time, I don't think anyone will go through the effort of decoding all of this crap just to see more wannabe mystical truisms from a possibly mentally ill guy. Seemingly, all of the images contain references to Cicada 3301 again, as well as a recurring and very poorly made illustration of a guy with a blindfold bleeding from his eyes, but with a third eye on his forehead, which we can assume is another self-insert of Bruno's, with prophecies scrawled on his body and around him, as well as the number 666 a whole bunch of times. It's so scary, I'm positively pooping in my panties. Sorry. Other than another set of images involving the Kabbalistic Tree of Life with a bunch of Egyptian symbols on it, not much else is present by Project A2. And since this one was never attached to a publicity stunt, it remained in obscurity, perhaps for the best. Here's hoping he doesn't disappear on us again. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, despite the intentional hype that built around the story of the mysterious Brazilian guy who vanished after supposedly discovering the secrets of the universe, it turned out to be somewhat of a nothing burger, cobbled together by a creative and dedicated man, though severely lacking in foresight, with too much time and freedom in his hands from being born into a relatively well-off family. This is not that surprising, to be honest, considering how often scammers, con artists, and otherwise not exactly upfront upfront and honest people target esoteric circles primarily because of how trusting and unorthodox they are. I mean, in a demographic that seems to regularly find something of value in drinking pee and doing coffee enemas, does it shock you that a disappearing act like that would work to sell more books? It could be worse, considering Brazilian spiritualist John of God used his position of power to do far more nefarious things than Bruno could or ever would aspire to. So I'm thinking we should appreciate how benign and immature this whole ordeal was, relatively speaking. Honestly, just from my little career reviewing extremely online people's careers and their misdeeds, it's sort of a breath of fresh air to cover some guy who, at worst, wanted to make a little money selling some schizo books online to credulous buyers. Though I doubt we'll ever hear from him again to any significant degree, at least it was a fun tale to get through. I do wish that, eventually, he reveals where he went during the time he was gone. It would be pretty funny if he was, I don't know, like sleeping outside a Burger King for 4 months or something to that effect. On top of that, though the books blew hot wind and were a total letdown, the bedroom statue antics are still attention-catching to this day. ARGs have a lot to learn from this guy as far as making things visually captivating and communicating a mysterious vibe. Regardless of all that though, it seems I'm now doomed to go back to my regularly scheduled programming of looking over the details of the catastrophic lives of insane, degenerate sex offenders that are addicted to drugs. Wholesome, I know. I've been Turkey Tom, thanks for watching, and until next time, leave me alone.
It's not that funny anymore.